Hi everyone. So before we proceed to the discussion on the solvings and the test in our subject, let us first discuss the historical, cultural, and legal or ethical considerations of psychological assessment. This is Cyril Tolentino, your first reporter. So our topic outline for my report will be focusing on the historical perspective. One is the antiquity to the 19th century. Under that are the contributions during Chinese history, the Greco-Roman era, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance period, and during the 18th century. And then we go to the 20th century where the measurement of intelligence and the measurement of personality emerges, as well as we will tap on the academic and applied traditions. So for our intended learning outcomes at the end of the discussion, the students are expected to identify the different areas where the tests and testing has significant development and identify the different theorists and proponents that has a big contribution to the development of psychological testing and assessment. Okay, now to start with, on China's history, it is thought that as early as 2200 BCE, test and testing programs are used in China. Okay, it is a way tests and testings are used to determine or select qualified applicants for government jobs. So it's important to take note that it has been a long tradition in China that government positions are held by families with high social status, and thus examinations and tests are important for common people to get into the positions and improve their life. So we all know na sa mga movie na napapanood natin, yung positions, government positions during Chinese era are governed or hawak ng mga pamilyang may matataas na katayuan sa lipunan. So, yung test and examination as a way to determine or select as someone for a government position is a good move para yung iba naman ang mag-rule or maghawak ng government position na yan. So, the contents of the examination changed as the ruling dynasty changed as well. So, however, in general, the test examined proficiencies in subjects like archery, music, horsemanship, writing, arithmetic, agriculture, geography, civil law, and military strategy. So, um, as the dynasty in China changes, of course, yung content ng examination na nag-change din. Pero in general, yun yung mga subject or course na usually ginatest nila. So, during the Han Dynasty of 206 BCE, it was thought to administer the earliest imperial exam. It was continued briefly by the Sui or Su era. So, it was then during the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, that the testing system was standardized. The reigning empress Wu Zetian relied on this imperial examination to recruit officials. The tests during the Song Dynasty, 960 to 1279 CE, emphasized knowledge of classical literatures. Examiners with high command in classicals are thought to acquire wisdom from their ancestors and are given a government position. So, notice that sa iba't ibang dynasty, iba't iba rin yung emphasis ng kanilang contents examination. So, also, those who receive good grades or high grades in examinations are privileged. Bakit privileged? Kasi iba-iba yung privilege na nabibigay sa iba't ibang dynasty. So, in general, some are privileged to wear a special robe na that gives them or that earned them the respect and accorded them courtesies by anyone they met. So, kapag ikaw, you receive good grades sa examination, privileged ka. So, in some time in China, you wear a special robe. So if anyone sees you in the street wearing that special robe, you receive a courtesy. So may it be yung simply bowing or when you pupunta ka sa nilang bahay, you receive good treatment kasi nga may naka-wear ka ng special robe. Or, pwede rin na you are exempt to pay taxes, or yung government-sponsored interrogation by torture. Same, may nangyaring krimen. So, you're exempted to be interrogated through torture kasi nga you receive good grades. Also, there was okay, however, um this system was corrupted and outdated by the Ming and the Qing dynasty. So uh, yung mga may possessions is binibigyan nila ng privilege yung mga kapamilya nila to enter the or to have the other position in the government without attending the examination or with bribing. Excuse me. Men with connections inside the court sometimes bribe or skip exams, but still got through their positions through nepotism or the practice of people in power forging their relatives and friends, especially by giving them jobs. Yun. So, okay, so after the Chinese era, we go to the Greco-Roman era naman. So, in the West, the Greco-Roman era with the writings of Hippocrates and the dissertation of Galen is the highlight during this era with regards to the development of psychological assessment and testing. So, yung theory, yung writings ni Hippocrates suggest that there are four bodily fluids, okay, called humor. So, if you have remember, yung four bodily fluids are the black bile, the yellow bile, the phlegm, and um, the blood. Okay, so it's according to Hippocrates that these bodily fluids affects directly to the body through the personality, behavior, and health of an individual. Okay, while Galen's dissertation considered the balance and imbalance of temperament pairs. So, kasi sabi niya that there are four temperaments sa katawan ng tao. He further added that these imbalances of pairs will result in any of the temperament categories of personality type. Yung temperament naman na ginamin niya dito is yung bodily fluids na gisuggest sa writings ni Hippocrates. So sabi niya na pag may imbalance daw or merong imbalance and imbalance ng temperament pairs, kumbaga mag-pair yun either the blood, the phlegm, the blood, the yellow bile, the blood, the black bile, or any of combinations or pairs of that. So he further added that these imbalances of pairs will result in any of the temperament categories. So pag mag-pair daw yung temperament na yun, it will result to personality types, which is yung sanguine or yung being optimistic and social, choleric, being short-tempered and irritable, the melancholic, being analytical and quiet, and phlegmatic, being relaxed and peaceful. So, itong four personality types, ganito gi-categorize ni Galen ang mga tao in their time. Now, after the Greco-Roman era, we moved to the Middle Ages, where new tests were developed based on the superstitions to test the true nature of an individual. Kasi, after the fall of Roman Empire, ay na may mga na-develop na new test with the use of superstitions as their basis. So, in 1200 AD, there was a witch trial on human to assess who is in the league with the devil. Kasi parang pagkatapos gumuho yung Roman Empire, nagkaroon ng parang nawala na yung mga teachings, nawala na yung parang strict adherence on religion, something like that. So, they resort to superstitions na. Okay, so during that time, there was this called witch trial. Okay, so ina-assess nila ang mga tao kung sino yung kumbaga witch this trial is ginasubmerge nila sa water yung tao. So if ma-drown sila, ibig sabihin tao sila. But if they are the person lived after gi-submerge sa water, then they will be executed for witchery. Kasi nga hindi sila namatay na gilunod sila ng tubig. So ano nila na witch yung tao na yon. So it was during the Renaissance period that psychological assessment in the modern sense began to emerge. An Italian philosopher named Juan Huarte published the first book to propose a discipline of the assessment called the Tyrant of Wits in 1698 AD. He argued that people have different talents that requires different vocations for their utilization. So kay yung tao daw may iba't ibang talents sa kailangan ma-utilize. So in Germany naman, Christian Thomasius created the first behavioral rating scale and rated participants on the scale with direct observation. Another German, Christian von Wolff, anticipated psychology as a science and psychological measurement as a specialty within that science. He also coined the term psychometrics in trying to quantify individuals' goodness of memory. Kasi that time, if you remember lessons, yung video na pinakita ni ma'am, 'di ba? Psychology is not considered as science. But Christian von Wolff, sinabi niya na psychology is a science since psychology is a science. Kasi nga, mayroon tayong mini-measure. Mini-measure natin yung may mini-measure tayo, ganun. Okay, so it was on the 18th century, during the 18th century na marami ng development ang psychological testament. Una na dyan, when Charles Darwin published his book on the origin of species by means of natural selection. Sabi niya dito na, yung species ng tao daw, yung pag-evolve ng species ng tao nakadepende na sa adaptivity and survival value natin kung i-accept ba or i-reject ng nature. So, ibig sabihin, kung yung evolution ng tao, yung species ng tao is nakadepende na sa adaptivity, paano tayo mag-adapt and paano tayo mag-survive. Kung yung measures natin is i-reject, tanggapin ng nature or i-reject, hindi tanggapin ng nature or i-accept, tanggapin ng nature yung adjustment natin, yung adaptivity natin. So, ito na book na ito ni Darwin is parang it piqued the interest of his half-cousin, Francis Galton. So, in 1869, Galton aspired to classify people according to their natural gifts and to ascertain their deviation from an average or statistical regression. He is also credited for his contribution to the development of many contemporary psychological assessment tools, including questionnaires, rating scales, and self-report inventories. Furthermore, he pioneered the use of statistical concepts central to psychological experimentation and testing, the coefficient and correlation. Okay, in 1884, at an exhibition in London, he displayed his anthropomorphic laboratory. So, Galton displayed this anthropometric laboratory in an exhibition in London. Okay, so it measures variables such as height, both in standing and sitting, arm span, weight, breathing capacity, strength of pull, strength of squeeze, swiftness of blow, keenness of sight, memory form, discrimination of color, and steadiness of hand. He urges educational institutions to keep anthropometric records on students. Another proponent na may major contribution to development of psychological assessment and testing is Wilhelm Max Wundt, that is known as the father of psychology. So at the University of Leipzig in Germany, he founded the first experimental psychology laboratory where the assessment was an important activity. So sa laboratory na gifound or na tinayo ni Wilhelm Max Wundt, important activity doon ang assessment. So, he and his students tried to formulate a general description of human abilities with respect to variables like reaction time, perception, and attention time. He focused on how people were similar. Unlike kay Galton, na yung focus kay Galton is yung differences ng tao. And Wundt is credited with conducting the first formal experiment in psychology, where he tried to assess the speed of thought by measuring how long it takes for the test subject to make a judgment. So, Wilhelm Max Wundt, siya yung credited sa unang formal experiment, and it was done in his laboratory. So, there are other students of Wundt that also has contributions to the development of psychological testing and assessments. So first on the list is James McKen-Cattell. On 1890, he coined the term mental test in his return to the University of Pennsylvania. He has this interaction with Galton, and he was inspired by it. So he returned back to the University of Pennsylvania in 1888 and coined the term mental test on 1890. So Boring noted that Cattell, more than any other person, was in this fashion responsible for getting mental testing underway in America, and it is plain that his motivation was similar to Galton's and was influenced or at least reinforced by Galton. So Cattell went on to become professor and chair of the psychology department at Columbia University. For over the next 26 years, he not only trained many psychologists, but also founded a number of publications. In 1921, Cattell was instrumental in founding the Psychological Corporation, which named 20 of the country's leading psychologists as its directors. The goal of the corporation was the advancement of psychology and the promotion of the useful applications of psychology. Next to Cattell is Spearman. So, Spearman is credited for originating in the concept of test, reliability, and as well as building the mathematical framework for the statistical technique of factor analysis. Next to Spearman is Victor Henry. He's a Frenchman that collaborated with Alfred Binet on papers suggesting how mental tests could be used to measure higher mental processes. Victor Henry is also well-known in experimental psychology for his work with Alfred Binet, as mentioned, regarding the spatial perception of touch and on the psychology of memory and individual psychology. His questionnaire on the earliest memories of childhood also gained him popularity. Next is Lightner Whitmer. He founded the first psychological clinic in the United States at the University of Pennsylvania. In the 1907, he founded a journal, Psychological Clinic, and the first article was entitled Clinical Psychology. Okay. So on to the 20th century, there was a major shift of how people perceived psychological testing and assessment. Okay, bakit? Kasi on the earlier years, yung psychological testings are involved only on the measurement of observable traits or activities like sensory abilities, reaction time, and the like. If you remember yung experiment ni Wundt, diba? But on the early 1900s, it changed after the birth of the first formal test on intelligence. Yung test na yun is understandable to anyone who had school-age children. So, yung public receptivity to psychological tests skyrocketed as more and more instruments were introduced to quantify mental ability and measure various mental characteristics such as personality, interests, attitudes, values, and other mental abilities. During the entrance of the 1900s, during the entrance of the 20th century, there are more psychological assessments were introduced that aims to measure yung mga unobservable traits naman, yung like personality, interest, yung mga hindi nakikita ng tao. So, yung public receptivity or yung antas ng pagtanggap ng tao sa psychological tests and measurements, tumaas ng tumaas. Parang tinatanggap na nila. Okay? So, yung measurement of intelligence started as early as 1895 when Alfred Binet and Victor Henry published several articles that argue for the measurement of abilities like memory and social comprehension. So, a 30-item test to measure the scale of intelligence was published by Binet and Theodore Simon 10 years later to help the Paris school children identify those with intellectual disabilities. So, 10 years later, Alfred Binet and Victor Henry published several articles. Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon published another 30-item measurement test, a scale of intelligence. It is designed to help identify Paris school children with intellectual disability. Parang ginagamit yun siya to identify sino sa mga student ng Paris school children yung may intellectual disability. Ganon. So, the mini test, yung test na yon na ginawa ni Binet and ni Theodore Simon undergoes more and more revisions, translations, and in the process, launched both the intelligence testing movement and in the clinical setting movement. So, note that before, yung psychological tests are only used with regularity in such diverse settings as schools, hospitals, clinics, courts, and reformatories and prisons. So, parang on the early years na gina launch na yung test sa clinical setting, parang ganon. David Wechsler introduced a new test designed to measure adult intelligence in 1939. So, David Wechsler, a clinical psychologist at Bellevue Hospital in New York City, introduced a new test designed to measure adult intelligence. So for him, intelligence was the aggregate or global capacity of the individual to act purposely, to think rationally, and to deal effectively with his environment. So originally, yung tawag sa test na yun is the Wechsler-Bellevue Intelligence Scale. However, as I mentioned, after several revision and translation, ginawa siyang Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale or WAIS. So, yun yung name niya. So, the WAIS has been revised several times since then. So, again, hindi naman siya constant na yun na yung test na yun na lang talaga, 'di ba? Sabi ni Ma'am, there should always kailangan yung mga test na ginagamit updated. So, just like any other test, the WAIS also undergone several revisions and translations. So, the versions of Wechsler tests have been published that extend the age range of test takers from early childhood through senior adulthood. Okay, the WAIS, the WAIS test has been revised several times and extended its range from, as I mentioned earlier, early childhood through senior adulthood. So, Binet also devised a group of intelligence tests. Hindi lang intelligence test. It responded the need for the American military to screen applicants with their intellectual ability during World War I and II. The psychologists would create and administer tests and interpret the tests during the war. So those results were used after the war for public and governmental applications. Due to this, new tests were being developed to test various abilities and interests as well as personalities. So it's because of the World War I and II, Binet devised group intelligence tests that would measure various abilities and interests as well as the personality. So The entrance of the measurement of personality was brought by World War I, when people realized that it is not only the need to screen the intellectual functioning of recruits, but also their adjustments in general. So after the World War I, yung mga recruits, diba, of course, they had emotional adjustments, recruit sila to enter the war. So, paano ma-refresh yung mindset nila na puros karahasan yung nakikita nila, di ba? So, Robert S. Woodworth chaired the Committee on Emotional Fitness, which aspires to develop measures of adjustments and emotional stability. Draftees and volunteers were asked to indicate yes or no to a series of questions that probed for the existence of various kinds of psychopathology. So, some of these questions, such as this, are you troubled with the idea that people are watching you on the street? Parang nakikita ka ng tao na you're holding gun, parang ganun good na questions. However, Woodworth and his colleague did not extend the test into experimental stages. Parang hindi na siya na put into experiment yung test na ginawa ni Woodworth and yung mga kasama niya. So after the war, he developed a personality test for civilian use called the Woodworth Psychoneurotic Inventory. So instead, gumawa siya ng personality test na pwedeng gamitin ng mga civilian. So tinawag niya itong Woodworth Psychoneurotic Inventory. So it is the first widely used self-report instrument of personality. Personality reports that use self-report methodologies have both advantages and disadvantages. So, una na dito is, it is thought that the respondents are the best people to provide answers about themselves. Of course, sino ba naman ang makakapag-fill in ng mga tanong regarding yourself kundi ikaw lang. Ngunit, may mga kaakibat ito na disadvantages. Una dito is, some may have poor insight about themselves. Yung hindi pa nila kilala masyado yung sarili nila or kulang pa yung understanding nila about sa sarili nila. Or some may believe a certain characteristic about themselves but in reality, it is not true. Parang, yung iba naman, naniwala sila na mabait sila pero yung totoo hindi naman, 'di ba? So pag nilagay niya yun siya sa test sa sheets na ginawa ni Woodworth, hindi siya say credible or valid kasi hindi naman yung trait niya. Yung pinaniniwalaan niya lang yun sa sarili niya na trait niya yun, pero in reality, people viewed him as not mabait. Pero that's how he viewed himself. Parang ganon. So, or some will not tell true about themselves, or yung iba naman, hindi nila sabihin na mabait sila or mapagbigay sila, sabihin natin na humble, or sadyang ayaw lang nila, may confidentiality issues sila, may trust issues sila, ganon. So, with these shortcomings, there was a need to alternative types of personality types. Parang, because of this pagkukulang or parang disadvantage ng ginawa ni Woodworth na psychoneurotic na test, parang there was a need for an alternative type to test personalities. Ganon. So, one method or approach came to be described as projective in nature. So, ayun na siya, pumasok na yung bagong types of tests. So, a projective test is one in which an individual is assumed to project onto some ambiguous stimuli his or her own unique needs, like unique needs, fears, hopes, and motivation. The ambiguous stimuli might be an ink blot, a drawing, a photograph, or something else. So, yun, the best or the use of this projective stimuli was popularized by Henry Morey and Christiana V. Morgan at the Harvard Psychological Clinic in the late 1930s. So, yung process ng projective test na ito is pinapakita yung projective stimuli, may it be an ink blot, a photograph, or a drawing, or kahit na iba sa isang tao, respondent. So, usually, yung respondent na ito is asked to tell a story. Kung ano yung magagawa niya ng story about the photo or the inkblot na pinakita sa kanya. So, yung story na yun, i-analyze yun ng sino mang attending psychologist or attending practitioner. I-analyze niya yun in terms of what needs and motivations the respondents may be projecting into that ambiguous picture. So, through the story of the respondent, parang malalaman ng kung sino man ang nag-attend or nagpagawa ng activity na yon, kung ano yung needs niya, yung motivations niya, yung fears niya, yung hopes niya. So, the best known projective test is the Rorschach test developed by Herman Rorschach. So, uh, you will know more about this Rorschach test in the abnormal psychology discussion, which I will also, or which I and my pair will also discuss. So, doon na natin i-discuss ng medyo malalim, medyo latas kanang put emphasis on the Rorschach. Kasi yung test namin, report namin yung projective test. Doon na natin yung siya bigyan ng pansin. Okay, next is the academic and applied tradition. So, psychological measurements can be traced in two distinct threads, the academic and applied. So in academic traditions, Galton, Vaughan, and other scholars na alam natin, researchers at universities throughout the world use the psychological tools for assessment in the expansion of knowledge, accelerate the understanding of human and animal behavior, and to revise and devise a new test that would fit into the contemporary world. Sa applied academic tradition rather, sa academic tradition ng psychological assessment, ginagamit ito siya ng researchers sa iba't ibang universities or mga past scholars natin to assess the expansion of knowledge. Kumbaga, to widen the knowledge about something, to accelerate the understanding of human, animal, and behavior since meron ding involvement ang animals experiment. Yun siya. And to revise and devise a new test. Sa sinasabi ni ma'am, kailangan updated, mag-aral na mag-aral para mag-fit yung test or kung ano mang gagamitin mo sa isang tao, di ba? Kasi nga, nagbabago tayo over time. Yun yung thought sa academic tradition. On the applied tradition naman, okay, the Chinese ancient examination for the selection of applicants for various positions is one example. As you have remembered during the first part of my report, diba, Chinese uses examinations to select or determine a certain person for that certain job. So yun yung applied tradition ng psychological assessment testing. Parang ginagamit siya to select a person fit for the job. Also, similarly, in today's world, psychological measurements are also used in selecting participants for certain positions, not only in the government but also in the organizational setting. So, ngayon din na in this world, ginagamit din yung psychological test and assessment to select jobs. And ginagamit yung tools of psychological assessment to help answer important questions. So, example like, who is best for this job? Sino kaya? What class should this child be placed in? Who is competent to stand trial? Ganon. Parang sa iba't ibang setting, nagagamit yung psychological assessment and testing. Also, the role of culture in human behavior was given an emphasis on recognition by contemporary test users. As mentioned, diba, we always need to put culture or kailangan natin na bigyan ng pansin yung kultura din ng tao. So, thus, whether in academic or applied settings, cultural sensitivity is needed for the development of tools in psychological assessment. So, kailangan yung psychological assessment daw, in development rather ng psychological assessment, kailangan natin ng cultural sensitivity kasi hindi naman tayo lahat pareha ng culture. So, this may apply to me, this may not apply to you. So, these issues, so the next reporter will discuss some issues regarding cultural sensitivity. So, this ends my topic. I hope you guys learned something. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask me. if magkita tayo, or if not, during face-to-face, you can ask me too. So these are my references for my report. Thank you and God bless.